Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your breakout sessions and found them to be educational and inspirational. During the next hour, we've got a great program for you. So to get us started in this session, we have an informative briefing and update on current events here in the Middle East from communications expert Neil Lazarus.
There's a new expression in the Israeli army. It's called the war between wars. That describes the situation in Israel and the Middle East today. It seems like yesterday that Israelis were running to the shelters in the Operation Guardians of the Wall, where we had over 3,500 rockets being fired at Israel and Israeli citizens being rescued primarily by the Iron Dome, which knocked down 90% of all of those rockets. I want to start with that campaign to understand really what's happening today in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. Propaganda will have you believe that the war that we saw in May 2021 was the result of Israel in Sheikh Jarrah or the violence on the Temple Mount. Those are catalysts. The only cause for the war that took place in May 2021 was a decision by Hamas to threaten the Palestinian Authority and Fatah. I remind you that Abu Mazen had cancelled the elections of the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas felt themselves free to take action. As a result, Hamas, at the end of the war, could say, we lead the Palestinian movement, Fatah doesn't. We rescued Jerusalem from the Zionists. Where was Fatah? Now, if you take that and you look at what's emerging, a new Middle East has taken place. Stand With Us is a non-political organization. The purpose of Stand With Us is education. So let's try and understand what it meant with a change of administration. This administration, like the past administration, has a different emphasis. Right for wrong, I let you decide. The emphasis has gone back to re-engaging with the Palestinian Authority. Prior administrations put pressure on the Palestinian Authority, boycotted it. This administration in America wants to reinvest. They don't want to get bogged down in a peace deal. They want to avoid those details and then certainly not running to try and get the Palestinians and the Israelis together. It's about managing the conflict. It's the war between wars. Now, that may be well, but realities are taking place on the ground in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Only in the first weeks of January, we saw 2 rockets being fired at Tel Aviv from Gaza. Hamas said it was the weather. If every time it rains here, we're going to get rockets on a major city in Israel, how do they say? Houston, we have a problem. But something took place in December 2021, which is important. There were elections, did take place. Elections took place in the West Bank, municipal elections. Hamas officially boycotted it, although they stood candidates not under their flag. Fatah did okay, but now there's in 2 stages. Abu Mazen played a game. Basically, they took the major cities and they delayed those elections again until March. But what I'm getting at is if you want to compare now to a year ago, both the American administration and the new Israeli government is looking to strengthen the Palestinian Authority because the fear is what happens if it collapses. So much so, Gantz met, the defense minister of Israel, met with Abu Mazen in his house and started talking about some mutual problems. Look, both by that meeting were strengthened. Abu Mazen is very concerned, he's not seen as legitimate by the vast majority of Palestinians today. Second of all, both are worried about the rise of Hamas and the attempt by Hamas to use violence to ignite the area. Israel has agreed to allow the Palestinian Authority anti-riot equipment in order to deal with demonstrations against the Palestinian Authority. One of the things I've been doing in this period of Zoom is having Zooms with Palestinians in the West Bank. Over and over again, the message is the Palestinian Authority is corrupt. Where is the Palestinian people's money? 35% of that money goes to the Palestinian Authority to put down criticism. One example you may be familiar of is that of Nazir Banat, who was a Palestinian arrested and killed by the Palestinian Authority for the crime of criticizing them. Now, there's actually research which has been done in the West Bank quite recently, and it gives us an understanding of really what public opinion is there. The question was asked, do you support a two-state solution? Overall, there was a 46% agreement with creating a Palestine next to an Israel, both in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. For us, I think is more interesting, is that the support for a two-state solution was much higher, 64% with Fatah supporters, 31% of Hamas said they would not agree to the existence of the State of Israel. Now that has implications. Why? That's the logic behind the Israeli government and the American government saying, look, they're not friends with Israel, but better have a Fatah-led Palestinian Authority than not. Clearly, in Israel, the opposition is opposed to that, as are the oppositions in the States. Now, one other question which I thought was interesting is there a preference for waging an armed struggle according to which party you are? What you see in that graph over and over again is, again, 61% of Hamas supporters supporting the armed struggle. Bottom line, the polls indicated what we know. Hamas doesn't support a two-state solution, and it wants an armed struggle. That is crucial because what we are seeing in the weeks that have gone by is that Hamas is instigating a violent campaign. That violent campaign, whether it's rock throwing, whether it's shooting, at Israeli soldiers or Jews living in the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, is also igniting elements of the Jewish community living in the West Bank. The headline, Hamas sees terrorism as a way to push Israel towards concessions. That's where we are in the West Bank vis-a-vis Hamas and Fatah in the war between wars. Let's jump straight into the Middle East. Now, whenever you look at this map, whenever I ask Israelis to look at this map, or Jews to look at this map in particular, the first thing they always say is, I see a little Israel and lots of orange. The reality is, that's not the way to see it. This map doesn't make sense. It's made of straight lines. Israel is not the center. What I would suggest you look at is to look at the map in a slightly different way, which is the war between Iran and the rest. Iran and the threat of a nuclear Iran is not an Israeli problem. It's a problem which threatens many of the countries in the regions. Now, there's that old saying, your enemy's enemy is your friend. The Israeli version is, your enemy's enemy is your friend, unless they're not. But what you can see by just looking at the map, by color-coding it slightly differently, is you can see why countries such as Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, even Saudi Arabia, Jordan, start to see mutual interest with dealing with Israel, both on a security level and on a military level. Sometimes openly, sometimes not. Now that map, if we're going to question it, is slightly simplistic. It's also a kind of a Jewish way to look at the Middle East or an Israeli way to look at the Middle East. For example, Iran has problems with its support from the Shiites in Iraq. More interestingly is there's beginnings of resentment towards Hezbollah in Lebanon. We'll talk about that in 30 seconds. If you want to understand the Middle East, think of a sandwich. Most of my analogies are to do with food because I'm hungry. Look, take this picture and you start to understand it. The top level of the Middle East are the superpowers. Russia is back. Putin is back. Putin wants to create a Russia with interests throughout the world, if not, definitely the Middle East. So what we're seeing is Russian intervention with Iran, Russian intervention in Syria. But America has changed, and we spoke about that already with the change of administration. One of the things we will talk about is the effect that Afghanistan had. America doesn't want to see another picture of its troops withdrawing from another Middle Eastern country. It doesn't want to get involved. But one country which I think is being ignored is that of China. The Cold War, which emerged from the last administration and continues until today between America and China, is important for the Middle East. Both Israel and other countries, the United Arab Emirates, for example, find themselves caught often in trade wars between America and China and having to decide which side they will buy from. Now, what we also see in the Middle East is non-state fundamentalists. Your Al-Qaedas, your Hezbollahs, your Hamases. All of these can start a war very quickly. Saudi Arabia and Iran are the large power players against each other, and they, as we saw in the last map, divide the Middle East itself. Keep an eye in 2022 on Turkey, because the signs are that Turkish foreign policy is beginning to change. And slowly but surely, they're making moves to try and not become friends with Israel, but to perhaps lower the tension. What is important on the third level is Israel and its neighbors. What Israel is following is an aggressive policy of making friends where you can with any country which is threatened either by fundamentalism, i.e. particularly Sunni, or from Iran, or the fundamentalism of the Shiites backed by Iran. We keep talking about Iran, so let's concentrate on a few major issues. To understand Iran, understand Afghanistan. Everybody here remembers the pictures of those desperate people trying to get on the planes of America at the airport in Kabul. Today, America is seen, rightly or wrongly, and I let you decide, as weak in the Middle East. This administration is not wanting to be involved in any other campaign which would see its troops withdraw. That's problematic in the light of Iran, because ideally, what America would love is a return to the Iran deal. The reality is that there are probably three options we can see emerging next year. One could be that, America sits down in Vienna and comes to the best deal with Iran with total transparency. I have my doubts. What could be remarkably dangerous is that there's an inadequate renegotiation, namely that a halfway deal is made, but America allows Iran to go nuclear. Or we see a collapse of talks totally. I would add that the Iran deal, as it stands, is problematic because it allows Iran to go nuclear by the end of it, even if they keep to it. Look, the reality is everyone talks about a potential Israeli strike. I'm not sure that that could be possible today, and that question has been raised itself. If we take, for example, just one example, the Fordow nuclear energy site, that is underground in a mountain, literally. Even more problematic is its location, and this is just one example. It's right next to the city of Qom, which is 1 hour and 17 minutes drive if you wanted to get there, according to Waze. That city is remarkably important for Shiites. You could, if you attack that site, spark a holy war. So this idea of people saying we need to bomb Iran and it's not as straightforward as it seems. I want to bring attention to the north. The north is crucial in relation to Iran and these guys, Hezbollah. Hezbollah has set itself up in Syria today, and Israel is in a cold war with Iran in Syria with Hezbollah. Iran fights wars using a simple principle: fight them in other people's countries using other people's troops. So the big question is whether a message from Israel can be given to Assad of Syria, which is, it's not worth your while hosting Iranian troops and Iranian allies such as Hezbollah. We've only seen recently attacks by Israel on Syrian ports such as Latakia, which we saw, according to foreign reports, Israel bombing weapons in the port coming from Iran going to Hezbollah. Those attacks are continuing and increasing. Let's wrap up with one last subject, which is the war within. We always talk about the war without, but there's a war within. With over 70 years of independence, Israel is still trying to define itself as a Jewish state. What we are seeing with this new government is that the ultra-Orthodox are not in the coalition. And we're starting to see a pluralization of many controversial issues, including the conversion of Jews or non-Jews to Jews, and whether there should be a monopoly over kashrut and kashrut certificates in Israel. Again, doesn't make the headlines abroad, but for us in Israel, it's a very important part of the war within. Perhaps to end with a positive note, that argument between Israeli Arabs and Jewish Israelis has taken a positive turn. Many of you may know this gentleman, Mansour Abbas. He's in the government. He's in the coalition. His party, Ram, is part of the government. And what he said for the first time really was this idea that, yes, Israel should be a Jewish state. We have to accept that as Muslims, as part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and work within the system. For me, if you want an opinion, I think that's a very positive move within Israel. We are out of time. I leave you with this thought. You could watch this presentation and be very depressed. The reality is, I'm very optimistic. Because everything that we've discussed, everything we've talked about in this presentation is a Jewish issue. It's a problem. For me, Zionism is exactly that. Israel's a real place, a real state, with real issues, real dilemmas, and real choices. And hopefully, very soon, despite COVID, with COVID, after COVID, we'll see you back in Jerusalem.
The incredible Neil Lazarus, thank you for a thought-provoking and informative briefing. It's an essential resource for our advocacy toolbox. Now, to update us on an incredible initiative called Connect for Progress, here is StandWithUs Executive Director of Research and Strategy, Max Samarov.
Thanks, Michael. So last year at this conference, StandWithUs announced a partnership with the Israeli company WaterGen and the Native American nonprofit Bright Path Strong. Our goal was to help bring clean drinking water to Native American communities that lack access to this vital resource, and we built the partnership around WaterGen's innovative Israeli technology, which creates clean drinking water from air. We're really proud that in 2021, StandWithUs helped coordinate a pilot project bringing WaterGen's technology to the Hard Rock community in Navajo Nation. We actually came together with local leaders and organizations as a Jewish and Native American coalition to address the lack of access to clean drinking water in the community. This is part of a larger initiative StandWithUs launched last year called Connect for Progress, which empowers people around the world to make life better in their own communities using unique Israeli solutions like WaterGen. We have more exciting projects in the works for 2022, so stay tuned. And if you think Israeli expertise or technology can help your community, please reach out to us at research@standwithus.com. Back to you, Michael.
Wow, Max, I love this. An incredible initiative that's sure to connect communities around the world to the important initiatives coming out of Israel. Amazing. Now, continuing the theme of bridge building, let's hear from Artists for Israel, a much-needed organization that works to prevent the spread of anti-Israel bigotry through art. They also help communities and people affected by terrorism and hate. Please welcome founder and CEO of Artists for Israel, Craig Dershowitz.
Thank you, Michael. Artists for Israel prevents the spread of anti-Israel bigotry, anti-Semitism, and helps heal those affected by hate. For the past 12 years, we've been working with artists from 32 different countries. And because those artists come from the progressive spaces, we live and work in marginalized communities. And for that reason, we have unique insight and unique ability to battle the scourge of anti-Semitism, which is affecting us all today. We will be painting massive images of the righteous among the nations in their home country with artists from their home country, showing them as examples of bravery, showing the people of those cities a model of bravery and courage, showing them what they should be doing and how they can help and assist the Jewish people in our time of need, and how they should have pride in how their people have done it in the past. We just completed one in Portugal, and we're doing another one in Greece, and we have 10 more planned throughout the year. Our Chalk Against Anti-Semitism program is empowering you, the people, to take a stand and become artists just like us, to become artists fighting anti-Semitism. And our book and our training sessions are helping you to do just that. Our campus program was on 65 campuses last semester, both virtual and in person, and we're continuing to grow that. We are a megaphone for the organizations on campus, getting their message out to hundreds of students per event, diverse students, bringing them in the door the first time to hear the pro-Israel narrative. None of this is possible without our partners, who have to be both strong and visionary to work with us on these new and unique ideas. And we have no partner more powerful or more effective than StandWithUs. So Michael, thank you. Roz and Jerry, always appreciate being part of this conference. And I look forward to working together for another 12 years or more.
Craig, you are an inspiration to us all. Thank you for your vision of a more beautiful, more peaceful, more understanding world. Now, the peace treaties between Israel and Gulf nations were a game changer for the Middle East. Last year at this conference, we were privileged to host a fascinating discussion between Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan Nahum, and best-selling author and diplomat from the United Arab Emirates, Omar al-Basaidi. Now, 1 year on from this transformational event, and by popular demand, we're pleased to welcome them back in conversation, together with Egyptian dissident, writer, and StandWithUs educator, Hussein Abu Bakr. This is sure to be a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, Flora and Omar. I'm very happy to be with you today. And Omar, let me start with you. Can you tell us what is the biggest success that you've seen this year?
Well, honestly, the biggest success, I believe, is seeing all the Israelis just flocking to the UAE. Everywhere you go, whether you're in the mall, on the streets, you go to the expo here in Dubai, you just hear Hebrew spoken everywhere. So I think for me, since the Abraham Accord was signed, it's truly, the vision is truly being realized by seeing people just openly coming to visit our country, and I think this is the dream come true for the leaders and the people in the region. So that's, I think, has been the biggest success in 2022, despite the pandemic.
Amazing. Flor, can you tell us some of the most significant milestones that were reached this last year?
Well, first of all, it's wonderful being here, Hussein, with you, and of course, all the StandWithUs people, and always with my friend Omar al-Basaidi. We should honestly become a road show by now. Look, this year has been, if 2020 was the year of the signing of the Accords, I think 2021 was the year of laying down the infrastructure for a long-term, sustainable and warm peace. And Omar is absolutely correct. Israelis have been flocking there. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. But ultimately, what we've seen is that people have developed deep relationships, friendships, business partnerships. We've seen a very significant deals this year, like, for example, Mubadala, which is one of the largest companies in the UAE, buying a stake in Delek, which is the largest gas exploration company in Israel. And this is not just about money. This really is a statement saying, we're in this together now. We are buying into your gas infrastructure in the country, which means that we're investing already in each other. So Israelis are flocking there. There's relocation of Israelis now in the UAE. The Jewish communities are growing like nobody could have imagined. And now, from my vantage point, I want the Emiratis to come to us. And we have been closed. And so that's not been possible. But I believe 2022 will be the year when the Emiratis get to know Israel. And I really can't wait.
Amazing. I'm sure that a lot of Emiratis can't wait either. Omar, Fleur just said something amazing. She said, this is not just about money. Does this mean that this is not just shared interests anymore, that Israelis and Emiratis are finding shared values?
It's definitely beyond money and everything else. I mean, of course, when I see Israelis and Americans, I don't even see that they have as much shared values and interest as much as I see Israelis and Emiratis. Honestly, I'm not just saying this because I'm biased, because I'm from the UAE. You feel the energy when you're on the ground. I mean, I met Flor. It was like I feel like she's literally like family, but we just did not connect. We're just not talking all these years. I think one of the reasons why we're very similar in a lot of ways is we both we're people that really respect and we value our traditions, but we embrace modernism, and we embrace progress, and we embrace moving forward. Like it's in our, when you just look at these two countries and how they're truly like forces of power in the region, and that kind of attitude, I think, is the reason why the link and the connection between Emiratis and Israelis is very, very different from everywhere else. So I would even probably say between Emiratis and other Arab countries in the region. So that's the reason why I feel like the potential is still out there, and we're just scratching the surface. As Flor mentioned, very well said, that in 2021 we just laid out the infrastructure, and right now, when we pass through this phase with Omicron or God knows what other like variant is out there, we're really going to see a lot more of the connections taking place. I can tell you, Flor, from now, and I know Flor talks a lot about tourism and bringing people, attracting them to come to Jerusalem. I'm literally in a WhatsApp group. There's about 35 people already that signed up on this WhatsApp group called, and the group is called As-Siyah Israel in Arabic, which is, tourism or travel to Israel. And these guys are getting ready to pack up and travel to Israel. They're just waiting to take their jabs and fly over to Israel. So you're
Omar, you can tell them that when they get to Jerusalem, they'll get the red carpet treatment from me. Okay.
I agree. Okay, inshallah.
Inshallah.
That's amazing. Let me ask you, Flor, if we have listeners right now who are in America and they feel jealous and left out, and they want to feel some of the love, they want to be a part of this, what can they do?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that there's absolutely no reason why everybody should be part of these incredible Abraham Accords, especially, let me tell you, Americans, who this was accords that were shaped and that were completely curated by the Americans, with help from Omar's incredible ambassador, Yusuf Al-Utaiba, and of course, His Majesty, Mohammed bin Zayed. But ultimately, America put it all together, and therefore America has to be a part of this. And there's many, many ways that they can tap into this. First of all, they can join my council, the UAE Israel Business Council, and just see what goes on. We have monthly newsletters, we have events all the time. Most of our events, because of COVID, have been virtual. Omar is part of another group called Sharaka, which also has a website and a platform. And if you're a woman, you can also join the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, where my good friend Aida Al-Busaidi, Omar's sister, is one of the founding members. And so there's many entry points to enjoy this relationship and to be a part of it. Really many entry points, and we welcome everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Omar, let me ask you now, aside from politics and the relations between two nations, I want to ask you about Omar personally. What is the impact that all of this transformation had on your own personal life?
I'll tell you this, as Flor mentioned, I'm part of, we're an NGO that was set up between Israelis and Emiratis. And I was attracted to join this organization because and to represent Sharaka in the US. And what I've always wanted on a personal level is to change the image and the idea or the stereotype that people had about Muslims, about the UAE, about the region, about Islam in general, especially in the US. They don't understand how many things that we as the UAE have in common with the Western principles and values, etc. And being part of Sharaka and being part of engaging with the Jewish community in the US has allowed me to really transfer the message of what the UAE is truly about. And when I share the stories about Emiratis that speak fluent Hebrew, and when we take people on delegations through Sharaka to the US, people are absolutely overwhelmed. They don't understand. They couldn't believe these stories. They thought it was maybe just a myth. But when we're there showing them stories and showing them live examples of people who are now we have Emiratis studying in Israel, they're blown away. So for me, I'm finally happy that on a personal level, what I've always wanted to kind of communicate to the West, I'm able to do it today through the help of working with Israelis and through Sharaka. So this is how this whole the Abraham Accords has affected me personally.
Amazing, amazing. And at the end, let me ask you, Flor, what do you see happening in 2022? What are you expecting?
So, like I said earlier, if 2020 was the year of the signing and 2021 was the year of laying out the infrastructure, I think 2022, a year which hopefully will bring us back to normal in terms of travel and in terms of being able to just be free and out of lockdown and a pandemic, then 2022 will be the year of real normalization, the year where we see hopefully hundreds of thousands of Muslims from around the Gulf, UAE, etc., coming to Jerusalem, coming and doing what they dream to do, which is to pray in Haram al-Sharif in Temple Mount, and us in Jerusalem to usher a new era of Muslim tourists that we've never really had. And at the moment, as part of my portfolio, I'm laying the infrastructure for that type of new tourism that we're very excited about. We're going to see much bigger deals. I think we're going to see government to government, real, very significant infrastructural energy deals continue. And I think that it's very, very exciting what we have ahead. And of course, what we also see in the background are the countries that are doing with us today under the radar normalization, the way that UAE for many years were doing under the radar normalization. So before the Abraham Accords were signed, we estimate there were a few hundred Israeli companies working in the UAE through third parties. And we're going to be seeing a lot of that with Saudi this year, hopefully Oman. I've already been approached by many, many people in Indonesia, which is not an Arab country, but it's the biggest Muslim country in the world. But I think that the world is discovering that the word we couldn't even say for so long, we are cousins and we can build a better region together.
Thank
Amen.
you, Flor. Thank you, Almar. It was an absolute pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having Flor and I together. Please, we're waiting for 2023. Don't forget to invite us again.
Hopefully, yes. Thank you.
May this be just the beginning of Israel's normalization of relationships with all of its neighbors and a beautiful, safer future for the region, and may peace continue to grow. If you want to help push the peace train forward, you can join our initiative. It's great that diplomats and leaders have signed the Abraham Accords, but we want to build people-to-people peace as well. That's why we've launched the People's Abraham Accords, and we want as many people from all over the world to sign their names to peace. Go to standwithus.com/Abraham Accords to do just that. Now, from right here in Jerusalem, a briefing on the past 6 months of the new Israeli government and politics in general. Joining Stand With Us' Rotem Benkel is senior contributing editor and diplomatic correspondent of the Jerusalem Post, Lahav Harkov.
Hi, Lav.
Hi.
So thank you for coming and thank you for your continued dedication to Stand With Us. I would like to ask you, so you've been covering Israeli government, affairs for years now. And tell me, what have the Israeli government's first 6 months been like? Any major accomplishments or setbacks?
So this government is very unique. It is diverse at a level that we really have not seen. With a government that ranges from an Islamist party to the far left to figures who were, until not that long ago, considered on the far right, and everyone in between. And the government began, I think, with a really wide expectation in Israel that it was going to fail. But so far it has held on for 6 months. So that's really, I know that that's maybe setting the bar very low, but I think that its big achievement is that it's managed to survive this long. And it's managed to survive this long because the different members of this coalition, as I said, we have the far left and the far right. We have centrist parties like Yesh Atid and Blue and White and others. And they're all sort of compromising and hearing each other out and holding a dialogue. And it's a dialogue between sectors in Israeli society, really, through their representatives. So that's really what their achievement has been. Their number one achievement so far has been, I think, that they've put us back on track for political stability and for a relatively civil dialogue when politics had gotten to a really polarized place in the couple of years before that, when we had 4 elections, basically one right after the other. And there are a lot of everyday sort of things going on in politics, but I think if you ask Israelis, that would be its main one.
Great. So after saying that, do you think this government is more right-wing, left-wing, or is it balancing itself? What do you think?
I think that it's relatively balanced. I think, in Israel, when you ask who's right-wing and who's left-wing, traditionally the answer to that question had to do with how people viewed the solution to the conflict with the Palestinians, and specifically through the prism of concessions of land. So the further you got to the right, the less likely you were to concede any land or any kind of autonomy for Palestinians on our land, greater autonomy that would be. And the further you get to the left, the sort of more land you would want to concede. I think that Israel's in a little bit of a different place politically right now because, again, after we had these 4 elections, one right after the other, there were major figures on the right who said we need to sort of break out of this paralysis. There were also concerns with former Prime Minister Netanyahu's corruption trials and, should that be a person who's leading the country, yes or no? And so they sort of broke that. And so now you have people like Prime Minister Naftali Bennett sitting in a coalition with the Labor and Meretz parties and also Ram, the Islamist party, who are very much for a 2-state solution. So these sides that are diametrically opposed are sitting together now. So the solution they've come to on that front is that they're basically not going to deal with that issue. They're going to deal with the Palestinians on an economic and humanitarian level, on a security level when it's necessary, and unfortunately it's necessary, but not on the diplomatic level. Which brings us to much more everyday sort of quotidian issues that I think a lot of people outside of Israel don't think about as much. On the day that we're recording this, there's a big debate going on about importing fruits and vegetables, which for some people is a huge matter of we should be supporting our local farmers. And for other people take a more capitalist view of no, we should lower taxes in general, including on fruit, in order to lower the cost of living for Israeli consumers. And, I'm sure people who live in any country in the world that are listening to this have heard of similar debates in their own countries. So that's where we're at. And then when it comes to a stance like that, those opinions that I've talked about, just to give that example about fruit and imports, you have those different voices and they have to talk and reach a compromise. Mm-hmm. So I would say it is balanced as opposed to left or right.
Okay, so you just mentioned right now that we have an Arab party, and I wanted to ask you, what exactly is Ram asking for the Arab sector, and how are they working with the rest of the Knesset? It's the first time that they're there.
Ram is a really interesting case. Ram used to be part of the Joint List, which was a bloc of a bunch of different Arab parties. And traditionally, even before the Joint List existed, the Arab parties did vote as a bloc. They tended to be sort of socially conservative, but very, very far to the left on diplomatic issues. And they would abstain from issues of religion and state in a sort of deal where, you don't deal with our religious issues and we won't touch your religious issues. But Ram started to feel that, and over the years, over the decades, these Arab parties were basically always in the opposition. There hasn't been an Arab party in a coalition since there were these sort of Arab parties that were satellites of the Labour Party 50 plus years ago. So, you know, the Ram party and its leader, Mansour Abbas, started to feel that for the Arab parties to automatically be in the opposition at all times and to resist cooperation most of the time with the other Zionist parties was not getting the Arab public anywhere. And so he decided first from the opposition, to just work with the coalition more. And at the time, that was Prime Minister Netanyahu. And now in this new coalition, he is actually a part of a coalition. Now they don't they're not in the cabinet, they're not ministers, and that's a choice that they made. In Israel, if you're a member of the cabinet, you hold legal responsibility for everything the government does, and I think that that has a lot to do with sort of the Palestinians and how they feel about that issue, that they don't want to hold responsibility for it. But they are a big part of this coalition because there's a very narrow majority, and every vote of every Ram member counts. And they have leveraged that. First of all, there's a huge task force and a lot of money being poured in to fight crime in the Arab sector. Crime in the Arab sector has really spiked in recent years. There were over 120 murders in 2021 within the Arab community. So a lot of really big issues going on there, and more money now is going into policing and programs within the community. And then another big thing that is actually a controversy in this coalition, there's debate about it, is, you know, there's a lot of illegal construction in Arab towns. And Ram would argue that it's because they're not giving enough building permits, whereas others would argue, no, that's simply illegal construction. People aren't asking for building permits. And I'm not going to take a side on that, but there's this big debate right now is that Ram wants everyone to be connected to the electric grid. Anyone who's been living in a house for years, doesn't matter if it's a legal house, not a legal house, they should have electricity. And there's a debate about this, about whether you're encouraging law breaking or whether it's a humanitarian issue and these people have families and they've been living in the house for years. So, you know, that is like a really big thing right now. And basically they're bringing a voice in Israeli government and in Israeli coalition that we weren't hearing as much up until now. Sure.
So we were talking about the domestic front, and I want to ask you, what about what's happening with the Palestinian conflict? Any movements in peace talks?
So as I said, this government has sort of agreed to disagree, and therefore they don't want to hold any kind of peace talks. That being said, what the different parties within the government have agreed on is to help the Palestinians economically and to try to improve just the quality of life for the Palestinians, which, you know, is both in some ways a humanitarian issue, but also viewed as a net benefit for Israel, that people with a higher quality of life will be less likely to, you know, go to terrorism. And so there's all kinds of little things that are being done, like increasing the amount of work permits for Palestinians to enter Israel. That's a big one, and it's been sort of gradually increasing over these 6 months. But there's also higher level things going on. The Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has met twice with Defense Minister Benny Gantz. Interestingly, Gantz has, you know, he's the former chief of staff of the IDF and the chief of staff during in 2014 in the Gaza conflicts. And interestingly, he has become the dovish figure, and some say that he wants to be like the next Yitzhak Rabin. So he's met twice with Abbas, with Palestinian Abbas, not Knesset member Abbas. And the second time, Abbas even came to his home. He hosted him in his home. That being said, again, there's no peace talks. The prime minister, the foreign minister say peace talks are not going to happen, and these are only about security arrangements and economic arrangements. And we shouldn't forget, I mean, you know, it's not just about an tough ideological stance from Naftali Bennett. It takes two to tango, and the Palestinian Authority has continued its pay-for-slay policy, which is that they provide monthly payments to terrorists in Israeli prisons and the families of terrorists who are killed by Israeli forces. And the longer the prison sentence, or if the person died, then you get paid more. So if you kill people, or if you kill more people, you get paid more. And Israelis say, you know, these are salaries for terrorists. You're incentivizing killing Israelis. That's going on. And the other thing's going on is that the Palestinians still have a case on the docket against Israel in the International Criminal Court, and against Gantz specifically, Gantz, who's been meeting with Abbas. They are pressing charges against him as though he is a war criminal. So it's not like, you know, the Palestinians are with open arms saying, let's have peace talks right now.
So we talked a bit about the Palestinian conflict and the peace talks that we're not doing right now. Let's talk about Iran. Internationally, there are talking and movements that are going on in that area. Do you think anything will change regarding Israeli policy?
So there has been a nuanced change in Israeli policy. In the previous government, former Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted nothing to do with any negotiations with Iran. He thought the 2015 deal was bad, and therefore the Biden administration's goal to return to that deal is bad, and he wasn't going to talk about it with them as long as they were pursuing that policy. This government still thinks the Iran deal is bad, still thinks the Biden administration should not pursue a return to it. However, they believe that by talking to the Biden administration and to the British and the French, the Germans, to a somewhat lesser extent the Russian and Chinese, but they're talking to everyone who's involved in these talks, except for Iran, of course. By talking to those people, there can be incremental changes to the bad deal to make it slightly less bad for Israel. So in both cases, unhappy with the Iran deal. A return to JCPOA is not enough for Israel's security, and the reason is that it does not place enough limitations on Iran's nuclear program, and those limitations do not last long enough. It also does not limit Iran's ability to fund terrorist proxies around the region and its ballistic missile program. Those things still stand. But at this point, the government is focused on trying to mitigate the damage and trying to say, okay, maybe lift fewer sanctions. Make sure Iran doesn't get as much money that it can spend on its terrorist proxies or on its nuclear program. And it's unfortunate that that's the place where we're at, right? Because the world is they're trying so hard to reach a deal that really is not good for Israel. But this government hopes that somewhere in the margins that it won't be as bad for Israel, and that's where they're different from, say, the Netanyahu government.
Okay. I want to ask you before we finish, is there anything that we aren't hearing that's going on right now, something that maybe should be on our radar?
After the Abraham Accords were announced in August 2020, there was a flurry of diplomatic activity, and we had 4 countries announcing diplomatic relations with Israel. Only 3 of those came to fruition because Sudan has a civil war now, and eventually, hopefully, that'll calm down and we could have relations with them. But there was talk about so many different countries: Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Mauritania, and I have to say a lot of that, it slowed down a bit. The Biden administration was trying to figure out sort of where it felt. They said positive things about the Abraham Accords, and they weren't sure where they wanted to move forward with it. And you really need an American buy-in to move these things forward. But there are talks going on now. It's already been reported that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with his Indonesian counterpart about ties with Israel, and I can say that there are others, sort of all kinds of small islands around the world that might have relations with Israel, and some African Muslim countries. And so I hope that 2022 is a year in which we'll hear about more countries establishing relations with Israel.
I hope so too. Lav Arkov, thank you very much.
As anti-Semitism has been rising on campuses, the University of Southern California, USC, has seen a few very serious, dangerous incidents, and community organizations, students, donors, faculty, and alumni wanted a more timely and clear response from the USC administration, which they finally got as the pressure mounted on USC. We'll now hear from an award-winning UCLA computer science professor, Judea Pearl, about a watershed response from the faculty at USC.
Hello, everybody. I thought I would like to share with you a scenario that took place at USC, University of Southern California, in the past 3 to 6 months, which I believe is a game changer for pro-Israel students on campus, and it can serve as a role model for other campuses in terms of what we can do and what we can achieve. And its uniqueness of this scenario lies in 3 ingredients. Let me first mention to you the 3 ingredients, and then I'll go back and elaborate on the details. The 3 ingredients are: 1, it started as a verbal attack on Zionist students. 2, it was entirely faculty-initiated pushback. And three, it was Zionism-focused demands and actions. Its achievements are also three. One, it garnered broad media coverage. Two, the administration was cornered to yield to making anti-Zionist the focus of remedial actions, both in terms of spelling out the word Zionism, two, making Zionism an integral part of Jewish identity, three, allowing faculty to participate in future action, and fourth, rendering student representation part of DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the third achievement, which I think is the most important one for us to realize, is that students and the entire campus became aware of the broad, perhaps even unconditional pro-Israel faculty support, and which in turn led to perceive Zionism as a valuable community in campus life. So let me go back and elaborate on each of those ingredients separately. First, it started as a verbal attack on Zionist students by a Palestinian student named Jasmine Meshayek. And she said something like, I would like to kill a mother F word Zionists. And it wasn't really extraordinary. And that kind of utterances are being heard occasionally by mentally disturbed anti-Israel advocates. But in this case, I believe she was misled by the operative that sent her. Probably, I would assume she got the instructions that as long as she talks aggressively against Zionism, it's open season, it's okay. As long as she doesn't mention the word Jews or Jewishness. It was a faculty-initiated pushback which caught the administration off guard. The usual response that the administration is used to receive is either student-initiated or a complaint by the Jewish leadership like Hillel or Chabad. Both are reserved and dismissible. Students are reserved because they don't want to intimidate the instructor. They want to get a good grade. They don't want to make noise. That caught administration off guard in contrast to the usual dismissible response that they used to get. They found here facing 65 distinguished professors, including Nobel Prize winners, deans of department, members of the national academies. These are non-ignorable, respectable part of the campus. These are people that make the university what it is, people who define the ranking and the reputation of the university. The third ingredient is that it was Zionist focus, demands and actions instead of the usual complaints against anti-Semitism. Today, decrying anti-Semitism is an opening, giving the administration an opening or an excuse for inaction. So instead of giving the administration an opening to repeat such tactics, they face now professor now demanding concrete, visible, and immediate actions. Let me read you verbatim what they demanded. They wanted public and specific statement that Jewish, Zionist, and Israeli students, as well as those who support the right of Israel to exist, need to hear from our leaders that they are welcome on our campus. In other words, what this professor's request is ask is the following: are we and our students welcome on a campus whose excellence and reputation we have helped build? Okay? It's a game changer because it reminds administration who owns the campus and what the university is all about. The achievement out of these demands, out of this professor letter, is as follows. Number one, a broad media coverage. Over 30 news outlets cover this story from left to right. The second achievement was administration yielding to making anti-Zionism the focus of remedial actions. What kind of remedial actions? Number one, don't underestimate it. Spelling out the word Zionism. It's unprecedented. If you look up the record of any university administration, you will not find the word Zionism spelled out. It's a radioactively toxic word. And here they actually spell that, spelled Zionophobia, which is even stronger than Zionism. It means there is something wrong with anti-Zionism. It means that they got the idea that being pro-Israel is not taking side, or being pro-Zionist is not taking side, because Zionism is a moral imperative. Second achievement, recognizing Zionism as an integral part of Jewish identity. That has not been yet campus-wide, but it was promised to be part of their reaction to the campus. Third one, faculty participation, which means that instead of those secret task forces which achieve nothing, they allow now, it happened yesterday, that they now invited one of the signatories on the 65 professors' letter to participate in what used to be a secret task forces, namely a license for inaction. And the fourth achievement was allowing student representation on DEI board, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's an achievement. It hasn't happened yet, but they opened the door. I would like to finalize with what I perceive to be the most important achievement of this whole exercise. Okay? Students and the entire campus became aware of unconditional pro-Israel faculty support. We have here 65 outspoken professors, which really represent 600 silent professors that did not have the guts to come out of the closet, but they will come out of the closet because now they have a respectable way out. And the message is very clear to the administration. The message is that Zionism on campus is not begging for safe space, but demands one as a respect-deserving community, not by victimhood, by what it had, by the kind of respect it earned by virtue of being carriers of unique nation-building experience, being champions of human rights and democracy, and through, of course, through academic excellence. I hope you can carry this message to your campuses. Thank you.
Now let's hear from an amazing supporter of Stand With Us, Israeli Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Idan Rol.
I'm pleased to address you today and pay tribute to the incredible work of the students, staff, volunteers, and supporters of Stand With Us. As a graduate of one of the first Stand With Us fellowship cohorts in Tel Aviv University, I learned firsthand how important and valuable this organization is. Now, as Deputy Foreign Minister, I'm fortunate to lead the government effort to improve Israel's image abroad. During the past months, my team and I have been working to create new platforms and mechanisms to better share the Israeli story, the story of both Israelis and all of those who support Israel around the world. Our work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs lies on two pillars. We thrive to build Israel's legitimacy by showing the progress our country made and the areas where we had positive impact, and at the same time to combat those who wish to delegitimize us and our existence here as the Jewish and democratic state. But we do not operate alone. Jewish and pro-Israeli organizations such as Stand With Us are vital partners in our efforts. There are many misconceptions about Israel. We need you, your initiative and enthusiasm to reach diverse communities and refute them. You can do that by sharing your unique Israeli story, opening dialogues, and being active on social media. So let's continue to work together to inspire audiences all around the world about what Israel truly is, the world's only Jewish state, a country that cherishes the democratic values, diversity, equality, tolerance, and coexistence. Thank you, Stand With Us. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you to Deputy Foreign Minister Idan Rol for your support and your leadership. You know, I always knew when you were in our fellowship that you'd go on to do great things. And thank you all for your invaluable participation and insights today. You've helped empower each other as activists and educators in this fight that we're all in together. Now, just before we end this incredible conference, let's check back in with the leaders of this organization. Stand With Us CEO and co-founder Roz Rothstein, along with Executive Director of Campus Affairs Rena Nessa First and Executive Director of High School Affairs Liz Tsai.
What an informative day this has been. I want to take the time to thank our incredible team at Stand With Us for working tirelessly on putting this conference together. Thank you, Leora Bacharach, Kate Chavez, Stephanie Margolis, and Aaron Alcabez for doing the heavy lifting, and Roy Stein and Harry Pallenberg for your tech experience. Thank you to our campus, high school, research and strategy, legal, and middle school departments for creating an incredible day of content. And of course, thank you to all of our regional offices, both local and international, for helping us make this conference a truly global effort. Together, we talked about our challenges and we embraced our opportunities. But remember, this is only the beginning. At Stand With Us, we continue to build a movement, and now you are a part of it. Take what you've learned to all of your communities, wherever you are in the world. Build bridges with both Jewish and non-Jewish friends and allies who are already Zionists, and work to educate those who are not yet friends of Israel, but simply need information. And let us know how we can help you. Each and every one of you has made the conscious decision to stand with Israel and stand against anti-Semitism. What you are doing takes courage and it takes commitment, and we applaud all of you for doing this important work. Stand With Us will always be there with resources and support anytime you need it to support Israel and fight anti-Semitism.
This past year, we've seen an alarming spike in anti-Semitic incidents, a fact that many of us have experienced personally. But you know what else we've seen? A tremendous movement of pride among Jewish and pro-Israel students. Our students are standing tall and proud of who they are. They're amplifying their community's voices for change. They're defining anti-Semitism and inviting their peers to call it out wherever they see it. They're building allies and gaining leadership representation on campus. And they know that Stand With Us is in their corner for whatever they might need. We are so proud to have been part of these students' journeys. And for all of you today, this conference is the beginning of yours. I want to thank all of the university students who joined us today. We're proud to have hosted students from campuses in the US, Canada, the UK, Brazil, Mexico, Germany, the Netherlands, and South Africa. While we aimed to inspire you throughout this conference, it is you who inspires us to continue our important work every day. We invite you to stick around and participate in our virtual partner fair, where you'll get to interact with our partner organizations who have ample resources and opportunities to share. Wishing you the best of luck, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you to all of our students. We are here today because we want to be empowered so that we can in turn empower others through education. Remember, we believe knowledge is power. Leventhal interns, TLC members, and student leaders, may I invite you to take a few minutes after this conference ends to reflect on how the inspiration and information you've received could make a difference in your schools and communities. Continue to support and engage with each other as you cultivate empowerment in your communities. I know that I will hear many incredible stories about the difference you have made this semester. Thank you in advance for your leadership.
I hope you take these conversations and discussions with you and that it empowers you to be the best activist you can be. You know, we depend on every single one of you, but together we're a global movement. So thank you for being with us today. It's been an incredible conference, and thank you so much for standing with us. See you again soon. Shalom from Israel.